So here we have 53 chapters about Joseph. So let's see about Joseph. Joseph was hated by his brethren. We'll see that later in Joseph's descendants. So that's the only choice you can come to, brother, if you're looking for descendants of Joseph, who later became Ephraim and Manasseh, and their descendants later peopled these nations. We're going to talk about the, I guess we can call him a patriarch, Joseph, the son of Israel. And I thought, when I first read an article I've had for some time, I was surprised to see that there's 53 chapters and even then other mentions in the Bible about Joseph. So I thought, there must be more to studying Joseph and his life of importance, to get all that God would take all that relative time in to give it to us in the written word. Please turn to 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. Now all these things happened to them, and he's talking about previous biblical figures and God's people. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. So we see there very clearly, brethren, that God mentions several times that the message is for the end of the age, prior to Christ's return. So here we have 53 chapters about Joseph. So let's see about Joseph. So the type of man that Joseph was, and what the Bible tells us about him, was very, I'm sure you're all aware of much about Joseph, because there was such an interesting part of his life. He started with his brothers disliking him, to say the least, and trying to get rid of him, and then trying to actually kill him. And then two of them relented, Reuben, thankfully, and Judah, said, no, wait, hold on here. Let's not kill him. Let's sell him. So it's a wonderful story, and it tells us a lot about what? Things related, as it said, to Joseph and his descendants. So the descendants of Joseph, God gives us a message through Joseph's life, that's applicable to today. And I think that we're since Jesus came, is really the beginning of the end of the age. But the very end of the age, prior to Jesus' return, there's things that we can learn about Joseph's descendants. Joseph as well, but Joseph's descendants. And then as a subtitle, I have what does this all have to do with America and other nations? That's a great question. I'm going to answer that in part. What the Bible says, what that has to do with us. So we're going to discuss here about Joseph. What type of man was he? What did he do specifically related to what I've been talking about? The first thing I have is, if you'll turn while I'm mentioning it, to Genesis 37. We're going to learn about the characteristics that personified Joseph. First of all, interestingly, he was not loved. Joseph was not loved, even amongst his own brethren. Of course he was loved. In fact, maybe he was loved a little bit too much by his father, because his father did favor him. And that's kind of a lesson for us. And that, on a side that just came to my mind, if you have a bunch of children, or two or more than one child, if you play favorites, just make it a point. It's okay. You're going to love one child more than others. Even Jesus loved some apostle more than others. But he loved all the other apostles too. So we have to do that. But Joseph's father loved him so much more. Maybe he didn't in his heart, but he expressed it by making him a special clothes. And then also he got a prophecy that they didn't like about him, and later, which actually was a true prophecy, what would be happening to him and his brothers. And of course, he was going to come out. It was a prophecy that was very favorable to him, but not so favorable to his brothers. So naturally, this just exacerbated the problem of his brothers not liking him. It says hate. It's hard to imagine that you could hate but the Bible does say hate, and I did not look it up in the lexicon. That may be a little bit of a translation there. It may not have been that bad, but maybe it was. Well, they talked about killing him, so maybe it was that bad. So that's one thing. That's one characteristic that we're going to see down to today. We're going to see that attitude down to today. And Joseph personified it, that he was not liked, or he was hated even by his own brethren. And so let's look at Genesis 37, what I have here. Let's start at 18 of Genesis 37. It shows this, it details this. Now, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him. They're talking about all the brothers were together, and here comes Joseph in the distance. And they conspired against him to kill him. And then it mentions, as I did, to reiterate, in 21, it says, but Reuben heard it, and he delivered, and he says, let us not kill him. So Reuben stood up for that. He didn't want that. And then later in 26, Judah spoke up. Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother? And so forth. I won't continue that because it's not applicable. And then 27, come, let us sell him. So I guess selling him is better than killing him, but it's still not great. It's still not a great attitude, and it would still be awful for you to do that to one of your siblings. So you can't really pat Judah on the back too much, but at least he, as well as Reuben, did not want to kill Joseph. So what they did is they finally agreed that they would. First of all, they were going to kill him. So they had thrown him down in this deep hole in the ground. But when they decided, well, we're not going to kill him, they pulled him out. Well, we're going to sell him. And just so happened that, we'll pick it up in 28. Then the Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. So here we learn that Joseph was hated, or whatever else you could say, by his brethren. So that typifies Joseph, and it will typify, we'll see that later in Joseph's descendants. Then stick there in 37. He was sold into slavery, put in bondage. Then turn over to Genesis 39, please. In that, as I mentioned, the area where did he go? He left his home. He left the area of his home, and he went to a foreign land. And the Bible specifies he was sold to the Midianites, and they took him to Egypt. So that also, we're going to see how that being leaving your land and going to another, having to go to another, whatever the circumstances, that also typifies Joseph's descendants, because this also happened to them. Way later, and even down to today. Then let's see. Joseph found favor with God and in a distant land, and his descendants were spread abroad. So let's see what we have in 39. In 39:1, let's pick it up. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. So all of a sudden, Joseph goes from his brothers almost trying to kill him, then later deciding to sell him, and going to a foreign land. But all of a sudden, circumstances were that he was bought by a man very high up and to the Pharaoh, which at that time was probably, Egypt was one of the major, if not the major country in the world at that time, and Pharaoh was the leader. And this man was also a friend and worked for Pharaoh that Joseph was sold to. We can see here the Lord, in 2, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And of course, this scenario of the people of Joseph's descendants going from nobody to actually becoming very important to Joseph's descendants even can be found today, and we're going to get there too eventually. Let's see here. Joseph became an outstanding servant to others, making food available during a severe famine and distress, and he became a servant to not only later to his own family, but to nations. Because remember, Joseph, if you'll please read this whole scenario, because as I said, it's 53 chapters that are covered about all the details, and we don't have time to get to talk about all of them. But you're familiar with most what I'm going to mention. So Joseph was put in charge, first of all, through very interesting circumstances. First of all, it didn't look good because the man that he was working for under Pharaoh, the man's wife, liked Joseph and tried to, I guess, what do you call it? make a pass at Joseph, and then when Joseph didn't have anything to do with it, she lied and mentioned that Joseph tried to force himself on her or whatever, and then Joseph's thrown in prison. So that didn't go very well. But through all the things you're going to read in your own study, Joseph gets out of prison because people in prison were friends of the man that he had worked for, and they had learned in prison that Joseph had, that God had given Joseph visions and could explain visions. Well, it just so happened that Pharaoh had a vision that he was very troubled with and it needed explanation. And the people that Joseph had worked for, and then the man that ran the prison, they brought that to Pharaoh's attention, and that's how Joseph was brought before Pharaoh, and then he answered the vision that was troubling, and it was what was troubling him was, without detailing, you'll find out in your study, it was found that Egypt was going to have 7 years of great surplus, tremendous agricultural wealth for the next 7 years. But then there would be 7 years of total, complete famine. Now, everywhere, all over the world of that time. 7 years would follow the 7 good years and then 7 bad. So that's where, as I just read to you, Pharaoh, probably God caused him to believe. He believed that Joseph had given him a good warning. And you'd want to know that, wouldn't you? Like we'd want to know that in the United States. Very much so. No matter how great things are, we would want to know if trouble's coming. We would like to know. It would be very nice if God would give us and tell us exactly. Of course, God does do these things. And as I said, in Joseph's descendants, this same scenario, similar scenario, has happened. And what it added up to is, it happened, they had this 7 years they couldn't even store all their wealth of their agriculture. Then the drought, or the famine hit. Well, the Pharaoh appointed Joseph then to manage that, which would take a lot of doing because all the surrounding nations were having famine. So they were not only going to provide for all of Egypt, but the Pharaoh was going to allow provisions for all the nations around, including Joseph's brothers and father who were back, and they were suffering this great famine as well. And that's where, when I read a short blurb about this, it said, Joseph became an outstanding servant to not only the people that employed him, so to speak, but to others as well, making food available during a great famine and distress, and even his family and major nations around. So that was, when we think about Joseph and read about Joseph in the Bible, we see that that was a proclivity of his, and that's what he typified. He typified that type of person. Just as his relatives, descendants will also. Let's turn to Genesis 41, please. Joseph's name was changed, and so were his descendants' names changed later, many years later. And remember, we had talked about these things were all given us on whom the end of the ages will come. So these things that we're talking about here are going to be prevalent. These scenarios are going to be happening to some peoples on this earth. Almost the same, very similar scenario that was happening to Joseph then. Okay, turn to 37. We'll fill in some of the tomatoes on the windowsill here. So the advice that he earlier it said this. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all of this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall then be over my house, and all my people you shall rule. According to your word, and only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring, which was done many years ago, done by many, even probably today. A leader or a powerful man, if he has a second in command, he will give him one of his rings. And he can show that, and it shows that he has received that authority from the top person. And so that's one of the reasons, because Joseph is going to be going out to all over Egypt and surrounding nations, and he could show that signet ring, and they would know that he had the authority of the Pharaoh. And so he put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments. Must have been special garments. It doesn't say, but I'm sure it was a uniform or whatever. In fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. And he made him ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, "Bow the knee." So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And here's where I just read to you earlier. And Pharaoh called Joseph by a new name, Zaphenath-Paaneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So that's the man he originally had worked for. Potiphar was mainly that had bought him. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. So we're going to see this scenario in Joseph's relatives, that they would receive great power and authority, and from nothing. Joseph went from being sold to slaves to being second in command, and actually Pharaoh was only greater in one way as far as being Pharaoh. He could not be Pharaoh. Pharaoh wasn't going to let him be Pharaoh. But everyone under that, he was given authority over, and that position. And we're going to see how that played out with Joseph's descendants. Then turn to 42, please, Genesis 42. Joseph learned and spoke another language, which his descendants also did, which is very unusual. Joseph was not recognized. When Joseph finally did deal with he went back and he provided food for his brothers and family, and he put in the deal. They had to come there, though. But when they met him and knew him, when he brought them back there to give them, they had to go there because that's where they had to get the food. And Joseph required that they come there. He wasn't going to send it to them. He had reasons, as you'll see in your study, why he wanted them to be there in Egypt and come to him. But when they did not recognize him. His own brothers did not recognize him. Well, this also has happened with Joseph's descendants. Exactly. Let's see, I mentioned 42:8. Let's see what we have. We'll pick it up maybe in 7. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Of course, they saw that he wasn't speaking their tongue originally. Then he said to them, where do you come from? See, so he's kind of messing with him, and you'll see in your study why he was doing this. So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Turn to Genesis 49:1. Something very, very interesting here. Exceedingly interesting. All of this is very interesting, but 49:1. Okay. Because I started with that Bible. It's an underlying principle of the Bible about how things that happened in the Scriptures, many of the things that happened have happened earlier, but many of them have not happened and will happen to those to whom the ends of the ages have come. Well, let's look at 49:1 here. At the end of his life, Jacob, or Israel, was going to give, it was customary, I guess, for the patriarchs. They all gave special blessings. Maybe, no doubt, God gave them prophecies to relate to their progeny, and he gave them information, and he would give blessings and also criticism, constructive criticism to all of his children. That was the customary in ancient times. Probably a very good custom, actually. So Jacob was doing this. We're jumping ahead here just I want to get this one important thing in, because I mentioned the New Testament mentioned about how things then are for our admonition. Well, that was also true back in ancient times. So look at 49:1. And Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather together, that I may tell you," what? Not just he's going to give them blessings, but what is he going to tell them? "What shall befall you in the last days?" And sadly, that is not translated as correctly as it should be. If you look up last days in the Hebrew lexicon, it's number 319. It doesn't say last days. It's not wrong, but it doesn't state exactly what should have been stated. And what should have been stated was that what shall befall you in the last days, it said, what shall befall you, it should read, your posterity and your future, or end time. So he wasn't just going to be telling them about their life, he was going to tell them that too, and he did. If you read on in your study, he takes each brother and gives him the various blessings that he's telling him about and prophecies. But all of it is also going to be prevalent at Joseph's descendants, or all of these brothers as well, not just Joseph. All of it will be prevalent and apropos to the end time, their descendants at the end time. So I thought that was, I had never saw that when I read that earlier. Go to Deuteronomy 33:17. Oh no, let's start in 13. Because this is also talking about Joseph. As I said, Joseph is mentioned not only in the 53 chapters earlier in Genesis, he's mentioned throughout the Bible, specific things. And here, pick it up in 13. And of Joseph he said, these are blessings that were going to be given by Moses. And to all of the relatives of Israel. And of Joseph he said, blessed of the Lord is his land with the precious things of heaven, and the dew and the deep lying beneath, with the precious fruits of the sun, with the precious produce of the mountains, and the best things of the ancient mountains. Let's see here. With the precious things of the everlasting hills, and the precious things of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of him who dwells in the bush. Remember, God showed himself in the burning bush. So they're going to have the favor of God. Let these blessings come on the head of Joseph. And then let's go on down to the last here. It mentions, let's pick it up in 17. And his glory, he's talking about Joseph, is like a firstborn bull. That's very interesting, as you'll see in your study. And his horns like the horns of the wild ox. Together with them he shall push the peoples to the ends of the earth. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. So we see here that if we take a look at Joseph's descendants, he was the youngest brother of 12 of Jacob. So you'll see in your study that Israel gave blessings to all of his children too. And that also you'll find that in your Bible where Israel, before he died, gave special blessings to all the 12 brothers. And when he got to Joseph, they were going, Jacob was dying, and Joseph was going. He had 2 sons in Egypt. He had 2 sons with his wife there, and one was called Manasseh, and one was called Ephraim. So Joseph was showing up here at his father's last days, where Jacob was going to give them all special blessings, all the brothers. Then Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me and said to me, behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you and make you of a multitude of people. And God doesn't usually use superlatives when he says, so when he inspired multitude, that meant almost an uncountable number, a great number. He's talking about Joseph's descendants now. And of his people, and give this land to your descendants after you as an everlasting possession. So this was going to be a blessing that wasn't just in his life and at that time, or even later in Bible history. It was going to extend all the way to as an everlasting possession. So as far as mankind's history on earth, these were going to be extant. They were. Let's see. And now your 2 sons. He's dealt with the other. He deals with all the brothers, but he's dealing with Joseph here. And now your 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine, he says, as Reuben and Simeon. They shall be mine. So he's adopting more or less, so to speak, Joseph's 2 sons equal or greater than all the other brothers, at least equal. And I think later it discloses here greater. Then scroll down to 8. Then Israel, which was actually the name was given, changed from Jacob. Then Israel saw Joseph's sons and said, maybe he hadn't even met them until that time. Who are these? And Joseph said to his father, they are my sons whom God has given me in this place. And he said, please bring them to me and I will bless them. So it went through an interesting scenario here. So about how in giving a blessing, remember, Manasseh was the older and Ephraim was the younger. But in giving the blessings, the blessings were supposed to go first to the firstborn. But Jacob, or Israel, did not do that. He started blessing Ephraim first. Well, in your study, you'll see that Joseph wasn't pleased with that because he wanted the firstborn, the eldest brother, to get the chief blessing. But Jacob or Israel was not doing that, and refused. When he was brought to his attention, he said he wasn't going to change it either. So let's see here. Then Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head. So later he also laid it on Manasseh. But let's go down to 16. The angel who has redeemed me from all evil, he says, bless these lads. And here he states something very important. Let my name be named upon them. So all the brothers had specific names, and they were of specific tribes which later became nations. So the first of the original 12 brothers, there was no Ephraim or Manasseh. There was no nation, or they were children of one of the brothers, Joseph. So what Israel's doing here is he's taking Ephraim and Manasseh and actually putting them in a special considerations for their future. And he says, let my name be named upon them. So their name is going to be Israel. The other brothers, all the brothers are part of the nation or the children of Israel, but their names weren't Israel. Jacob here, or Israel, is saying that Ephraim and Manasseh will not go by that name. He is saying he is giving them his name, and his name was Israel. So Ephraim and Manasseh took the name of Israel, both of them. And the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. And let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. So this is a prophecy then, and it wasn't just then. In their lifetime, they could not grow into in Ephraim and Manasseh's actual lifetime, brethren, they could not grow into a multitude in the earth. So this, of course, is a prophecy, as we said, made to Joseph and his sons, that will be extant at the end of the age, though. At the end of the age, these two nations, or children of Joseph, of Israel, and their grandfather's Israel, and he adopted them and named them Israel. That will happen. They will be extant at the end of the age, and they will be recognized eventually. Now, it says at the end of the age, they will be recognized. But remember, we mentioned a lot of these things that I've mentioned that happened to Joseph, like in this one, it did not happen until later on in his life, or won't happen until later on, just before the end of the age. I have 19 here. But his father, that's where his father refused to change. Joseph wanted him to change. He wanted the first blessing, the greatest blessing, to go to Manasseh, but he did not do that. Then look at 49. Again, we're going to repeat this because it's vital here, because it's all connected here to what Israel just did, the blessings that he prophesied for them. In 49:1 it says, and Jacob called his sons and said, gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. And we've seen the last days, properly translated, meant the end of the age. Or end time, or your posterity, or future. All of those are mentioned in the Hebrew translation of last days. So look around the world, brethren. This is easy to do. We see, we've talked about all these blessings that we talked about having growing into multitude, a great number of peoples, being wealthy, having great agriculture. I wrote down 7 of them. Numerically large, militarily strong, supremacy at sea power. it mentions going back to Abraham. See, some of Abraham's blessings were meant for all time, too. They were unconditional. And when we read the blessings of Abraham, it talks about having primacy over gates of your enemy, sea power. And they will possess large national resources. They will possess great agricultural resources. So when you blend Abraham's prophecy of blessings to Israel, that follows down, well, that since Joseph's children are Israel, they would all that would be happening to them, and then in a smaller way, much smaller way, but then later to their descendants at the end of the age. So when you look around, and it's easy to do, with the background information of your study and the things that I've covered, it's easy to do if you look at. I have a world globe, and it's exact. It shows even the mountain ranges and everything. I bought it years ago. It's very valuable to look at. Look around the world, brethren, and let's look at the major nations, the powerful nations, the nations that have some of these blessings. The nations I'm going to mention have none. None of these nations have all or even most of these blessings that I just mentioned to you. Geographic and climate advantage. Numerically large. Militarily strong. Your supremacy of sea power. Possess large national resources. Possess great agricultural resources. So I've named the ones that could possibly be, and that some of these have some of these, are blessed with some of these. The one I studied, China. China absolutely does not have. Most of China in ancient times actually was much more powerful and rich, and probably possessed several of these blessings in more ancient time. And my study about that years ago, from a woman that went there and studied the great encyclopedias that have come down for several thousand years in China. China was quite a nation, even a sea power. So ancient China, not modern China. Modern China has only one or two of these, maybe military power, and then maybe one or two or three, maybe. So I listed them, most possibly could be, but they're not. They only have two or three of these blessings, great blessings. India, same way, has one or two, but almost none of some. They are not a sea power at all. For example, you have Malaysia, which is a large nation, hundreds of millions of people. It's a group of nations. No. Maybe one or two. Indonesia, same way. There are several 100 million Indonesians. Only one or two, if that. Russia. Now, Russia has maybe two or three. They have almost no. They have to. Turkey actually, they'd be landlocked. Their Atlantic side is frozen most of the year. It's frozen up. You couldn't have a naval base there if you wanted it. And in the Mediterranean, to get into the Mediterranean, the Russians have to go through a area that Turkey controls. They have to. Actually, Turkey controls their access to the Mediterranean, and other nations control their access to. If you want to even include parts of Russia that are not parts of Russia today, in Greater Soviet Union, they had one or two ports, but they were all in most of the year were frozen up. They would not be great naval bases, and you would not get supremacy at sea operating out of the ones, even in the Soviet Union. So there are no other great nations, brethren, that would qualify for this. And also Europe. Europe, remember, is individually 31 or 32 nations, relatively smaller. Some are large. Incidentally, Britain, as Isaac Newton said in his book, Britain when the Romans left, the Romans conquered part of Britain, but they left after 400 years. And he says when the Romans left England or Britain was detached, not to be connected again with Europe. So the rest of Europe, Germany has very limited access to sea power. They do have some. The reason they had mainly submarines is they could, every time they'd get a big, I read Winston Churchill's history of the Second World War, every time the Germans would get a big, huge military vessel and sail it out in, the English would sink it. so they were never, but the U-boats, in which they realized the only way we're going to be able to attack the Britain or America at sea is through submarines, which was somewhat successful. But as far as the sea power, they never were, and in history never were. And certainly no other country was much smaller than Germany. Germany is the largest of those. Italy, any ones you want. Will meet one or two or three of these qualifications, maybe, but all of them, no. So there's only, brethren, as you already know in advance, there's only two nations on the face of the earth that qualify in every one of these blessings, great blessings. Now, we're not just talking about minor things, major blessings. And that's Great Britain and America. And of course, it's easy to separate them because when you read in your own study about Ephraim was not just to grow to be a great nation, he was to grow to be a nation and company of nations. Well, Great Britain is the only nation that fills that bill. The only nation. There are some nations that have had a colony or two. Germany has had, France has had. But Great Britain had numerous of them that were very large and powerful, and also of the same language and of the same ethnicity. Canada, Australia, South Africa originally was later conquered by the British and ruled there. America, of course. So, and even to this day, I think I mentioned this once or twice, Britain still controls, the king or queen of Britain still is head of state of Canada and Australia. They don't like it. The British are very wise. They kind of stay out of their business. But what they do is that, in both cases, the king or queen of Britain appoints a governor general to Canada. They appoint a governor general to Australia. And that nation must counsel with them. Because a few years ago, I had to laugh. I was shocked because I learned these things. I did not know that. And I was shocked. Queen Elizabeth at one time fired the Prime Minister of Australia. I thought, whoa, wow. That even shocked the Australians because they weren't using the hard power. Britain are pretty wise in many ways. If you don't fight them, they don't usually use hard power on you. Did Britain have to go to war with Canada? No. Did Britain have to go to war with Australia to become independent? No. But, so, no other nation could it be but Britain, Ephraim, to be a great nation meeting these prerequisites, and also be a company of nations. And they've gone way beyond that. To this day, there's still 40-plus nations that are in an organization that the king or queen of England, what do they call it? Britain's a monarchy, but no, it's called well, anyway, it's a group of nations that deal directly with them very, very closely. Commonwealth. Thank you. So they not only have had large and great, huge nations break off from Ephraim or Britain, they have always retained, to this day, there's 30, I think it's 40 plus nations. They're small. Most of them are small. Not all. Some are large African nations. Are part of the British Commonwealth, which means they have a very close relationship in trade, in government, in military. They fought with the British in wars and the Americans. And of course the other ones are equally easy to ascertain, because it says that the other, Manasseh, will become the great one nation and powerful nation that meets these requirements. And of course, to this degree, where we supplanted in many, many ways Great Britain years ago. The Second World War, America actually became greater and stronger in many of these areas, not in all, than Britain. So that's the only choice you can come to, brethren, if you're looking for descendants of Joseph, who later became Ephraim and Manasseh, and their descendants later peopled these nations. The Ephraimites came out of the Holy Lands, or whatever you want to call it, Caucasus, and into Europe and on into Britain. And so did the Manassites. And later, the Manassites broke off from Ephraim and came to and founded the United States. And then America arose as a singular and complete, and later totally separated, and in fact even went to war over it, because Britain didn't want to let them go. I think Britain would have, as I mentioned, didn't Britain let Canada go? Yes, they did. Didn't Britain eventually let Australia go? And many other smaller areas that they've ruled. At one time there was a saying that Britain at one time ruled 2/3 of the nations in the world, and not just nationally, but economically. And even today, the last time I read, now this could have changed in the last 10 years, but 8 or 10 years ago I read that I think it was 1/3 of all business in the world was done. Now this was just 10 or 15 years ago, in pounds sterling, in the British pound. America was dollar, much greater, but Britain is still not also ran, even today, even though they've given up a lot of their, as America is doing, and also. So, if you ever had trouble connecting that, brethren, I hope that I've helped with the little that I've been able to bring to you, and in your study, you'll see that this is, for years and years and years, I heard from all hands, Protestants, other non-religious nations, they ridiculed that when it was brought up, because it was brought up a couple of hundred years ago. The British used to have a society called the British Israel Society. They knew, they understood it, even as not about religion, just about when you go back in history. They know that those people did migrate into Britain from the Caucasus, and then originally from the Middle Eastern areas. So I thought that was important, brethren, when I saw that was so much about Joseph. And so I wanted to bring that to you today.
You have received this information based upon the Word of God. Every additional topic concerning the truth, which originates in Scripture, builds understanding leading to salvation. We hope you will personally review the scriptures cited in this presentation. God will teach you if you ask Him. Until next time, good day.